The Galactic Council's Division of Technological Assessment had kept the Cosmic Technology Index for 11 million standard cycles. Every species that learned to travel between stars received a score. The number measured how much they had given to galactic progress, how many new ideas they had created, how many problems they had solved. They held the highest score at 847 points. They had earned this over 2 million cycles of careful work. The crystalline came second with 612 points. Most species earned between 50 and 200 points before they stopped creating new things. They would reach a comfortable level of technology and stay there, happy with what they had. Coordinator had worked in the division for 3,000 cycles. She had seen hundreds of species rise and fall. She had watched young civilizations burst onto the galactic stage with new ideas, then slowly fade into comfortable silence. It was the natural way of things. Innovation was hard. Comfort was easy. When the automated systems flagged species 7291C for routine evaluation, I expected nothing unusual. The species had only achieved faster-than-light travel 43 standard cycles ago. In cosmic terms, they were newborns, barely old enough to notice. They were small and wet, covered mostly in water. Their biology was carbon-based and extremely fragile. They could die from temperature changes, from lack of water, from tiny organisms they could not even see. Their average was less than 1 standard cycle. I almost felt sorry for them. Such brief lives, such limited time to understand anything. She ran the preliminary assessment without much attention. Her mind was already on the next task. Then she saw the numbers and stopped breathing. That could not be right. She ran the numbers again. The same result appeared. She ran them a third time, checking every input, every formula, every data source. The numbers did not change. I called an emergency session of the High Council. The 7 members of the High Council sat in their floating chairs, arranged in a circle around the central display. High Assessor presided over the meeting, his 7 eyes blinking slowly as he reviewed the data I had sent ahead. "This cannot be accurate," said. His voice was calm, but I could see his eyes blinking faster now, a sign of stress in his species. "You are telling me these humans have already accumulated 2,341 index points." "The numbers are, High Assessor." I kept her voice steady. "I ran the calculations myself, 3 times. Then I had the central computer verify them independently. In 43 cycles," continued, "they have exceeded the total contributions of species that have been part of galactic civilization for millions of cycles." "Yes, High Assessor." The chamber fell silent. The other council members exchanged glances. Some looked confused, others looked worried. Assessor leaned forward. Her crystalline body caught the light as she moved. "What exactly are they contributing? New power sources, transportation methods?" "Everything," I replied. "They are contributing everything." She pulled up a detailed display. "In the last cycle alone, they have filed 312 novel applications, new methods for energy generation, new communication technologies, new materials, new medical procedures." "That is impossible," said Assessor. "No species innovates that quickly, not even in their early expansion phase." "I thought the same," I said. "So I looked more closely at their work. What I found was troubling and remarkable." She brought up a specific example. A complex diagram filled the display. "This is their latest contribution. They call it dimensional cascade communication. It allows faster-than-light transmission of information across 11 dimensions simultaneously." Study the diagram. "This combines crystal harmonics with quantum threading." "Yes." "Those technologies are incompatible. The approaches are based on completely different theoretical frameworks. Everyone knows this." "Everyone knew this," I corrected gently. "The humans did not know, so they tried it anyway, and it works." The silence that followed was different from before. Before, it had been confusion. Now it was something closer to fear. Assessor's crystalline form pulsed with agitation. How could they not know? The incompatibility between and technologies has been established for over 1,000,000 cycles. The humans have only been in contact with us for 43 cycles, reminded her. They have not had time to learn what is supposed to be impossible. They simply try things. That is reckless, said. That is how they work, replied. They try things. If the things fail, they try something else. If the things work, they try to make them better. They do not seem to understand the concept of a stable technological plateau. Leaned back in his chair. His 7 eyes closed one after another as he processed the implications. When they opened again, he looked directly at her. You said there are very short. Less than 1 standard cycle, on average. Perhaps that explains it, mused. They do not have time to become comfortable. They do not have time to accept that things are the way they are. By the time they might learn to stop questioning, they are dead, and the next generation begins questioning again. A species of perpetual beginners, said, never reaching the maturity to accept established truths. Or, said carefully, a species that never stops asking why established truths are true. The distinction was subtle but important. The council members understood it immediately. At their current rate of contribution, said slowly, how long until they surpass the combined total of all founding species? I had hoped he would not ask that question, but she had prepared the answer anyway. At their current rate, approximately 100 standard cycles, but their rate is not constant. It is accelerating. If the acceleration continues, they will surpass the founders in less than 50 cycles. Nobody spoke. In 11,000,000 cycles of galactic history, no species had ever challenged the founders for technological supremacy. The very idea was absurd. The founders had been building knowledge when these humans were still swimming in their planet's primitive oceans. And now, in less than a single lifetime by galactic standards, the humans threatened to overturn the entire order of things. What do we do? Asked. Do we restrict their access to galactic knowledge, slow them down? On what grounds? Replied. They have broken no laws, they have threatened no one, they are simply creating. They are disrupting everything we have built. They are adding to everything we have built. That is supposed to be the purpose of the index, to encourage contribution, to measure progress. His voice held a strange note, almost admiration. We created the index to reward exactly this kind of behavior. We simply never imagined any species would actually do it. I watched the council members debate. She had her own opinion, but she was only a coordinator. Her job was to provide information, not to make decisions. But she had spent the last several days reviewing human contributions in detail. She had read their research papers. She had studied their methods. She had come to understand something about them that the council was only beginning to grasp. The humans were not just innovative. They were creative in a way that was almost alien. They saw connections that no one else saw. They asked questions that no one else thought to ask. They combined ideas from completely different fields and somehow made them work together. And they shared everything. That was perhaps the most surprising thing about them. They shared their discoveries freely, openly, with anyone who wanted to learn. They seemed to believe that knowledge should spread as widely as possible. Finally reached a decision. Bring their representatives to the Grand Archive, he announced. Let them see what we have accumulated over 11,000,000 cycles. Let us see what they do with it. That is dangerous, protested. If they can accomplish this much with limited access, imagine what they will do with full access to the archive. That is exactly what I want to see, replied. For 11,000,000 cycles, we have guarded our knowledge carefully. We have shared it slowly in measured doses. We have been afraid of what might happen if too much knowledge fell into the wrong hands. He paused. his 7 eyes focusing on the display, still showing the human's latest creation. Perhaps we have been too careful. Perhaps we have forgotten why we started gathering knowledge in the first place. Perhaps these humans, with their brief lives and endless questions, will remind us. The meeting ended without consensus, but had made his decision. The invitation was sent. In a distant arm of the galaxy, aboard a human research station, Ambassador Wei received the message. She read it twice, then smiled. "They want to show us their library," she told her colleagues. "I think we are about to make some very interesting discoveries." She had no idea how right she was. None of them did. The galaxy was about to change in ways that no one, human or otherwise, could predict. The only thing certain was that it would never be the same again. Ambassador Wei stood in the Grand Archive and felt very small. She was used to that feeling. Humans often felt small. Their planet was small, their sun was ordinary, their lives were brief. But they had learned long ago that feeling small was not the same as being unimportant. The archive stretched upward into darkness. Crystalline data structures rose like towers, each one containing millions of years of accumulated knowledge. Soft lights pulsed within the crystals, marking the flow of information. The air hummed with energy that could feel against her skin. "This is the oldest section," said A, walking beside her. The coordinator had been assigned as humanity's liaison, a role she seemed to take seriously. "It contains records from the first spacefaring civilizations, over 11 million cycles of discovery." Nodded slowly. She was already making notes with her neural implant, recording everything she saw. Her mind raced with questions, not questions about what the archive contained, questions about how it was organized, how information was stored, how it was accessed. "The organization is beautiful," said. "Very logical, very clean." "Thank you. We have refined the system over many millions of cycles." "I notice the different disciplines are kept separate," pointed toward 2 distant sections of the archive. "The crystal research is there. The quantum work is over there. They must be several kilometers apart." "Yes, different theoretical frameworks require different storage methods. We organize by discipline, then by species, then by date. It allows for efficient retrieval of related materials." "But what about materials that are related across disciplines?" A's tendrils curled slightly. A sign of confusion had learned. "I am not sure I understand the question." "What if someone wants to study crystals and quantum mechanics at the same time? What if there are connections between them that only become visible when you look at both together?" "Those are different disciplines," I said. "Why would anyone need to study both simultaneously?" Smiled. It was the smile she used when she was about to say something that might seem strange. "Back on Earth, we have a saying. Some of our best discoveries came from looking in the wrong place, from asking questions that experts considered foolish, from combining things that everyone knew did not belong together." I considered this. "That seems inefficient." "It is extremely inefficient. We waste enormous amounts of time pursuing ideas that turn out to be wrong, but sometimes one of those wrong ideas leads somewhere unexpected, somewhere nobody else had thought to look." Over the following months, human researchers arrived at the Grand Archive in growing numbers. They came from every field and discipline that humanity had developed: physicists and poets, engineers and artists, biologists and musicians, mathematicians and historians. They asked questions that the archive staff found bizarre. A team from the Institute wanted to know if anyone had ever applied organic chemistry to stellar engineering. The archivists explained that those were completely different fields. The humans wanted to try it anyway. A researcher from the Nairobi Polytechnic asked about a failed experiment from 60,000 cycles ago. A species called the had attempted dimensional folding and failed catastrophically. Their entire civilization had been destroyed. The records were kept only as a warning. The human researcher read through everything. Then she asked if anyone had tried the same experiment using modern metamaterials. The archivist said no. No one had wanted to risk repeating the fate. The researcher looked puzzled. But the metamaterials would solve the instability problem, she said. It is obvious from the equations. A group from the Mumbai Polytechnic Institute tackled a propulsion problem that had defeated galactic engineers for 60,000 cycles. They solved it in 8 months. Their solution involved applying a musical composition technique from Earth's Baroque period to the relevant equations. When I asked them to explain how music had anything to do with spacecraft propulsion, they shrugged. "It is about patterns," one of them said. "Understood something about mathematical recursion that applies here. We just translated it into the right framework." The coordinator reported these findings to High Assessor. He listened without interrupting. "They solved the variance propulsion problem," I said, "using music." "I heard," replied. "We have had our best minds working on that problem for 60,000 cycles." "I know." A's tendrils writhed with frustration. "How are they doing this? They are so young. Their civilization is so primitive compared to ours. How are they seeing things that we missed?" Was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "Perhaps that is exactly why they see what we miss. They have not had time to learn what is impossible. They have not spent millions of cycles building walls between disciplines. They do not know where the boundaries are, so they walk right through them." Meanwhile, Wei was having a similar conversation with A. "You see patterns where we see walls," the coordinator said. They were walking through one of the archives connecting passages, where different sections came close together. "How do you do it?" Considered the question carefully. It was something she had thought about often. "Our lives are short," she said finally. "We do not have time to master a single field completely. We cannot spend 10,000 cycles learning the subtle details of one discipline. So instead, we learn a little about many things. We become generalists rather than specialists." "That seems like a weakness," I observed. "It is a weakness. We are not as good at any single thing as species that have had time to perfect their knowledge. But it is also a strength. We see connections between fields because we have studied many fields. We do not know that certain combinations are impossible because we have not spent enough time in any one area to learn the rules." They stopped at a junction where 3 corridors met. Each corridor led to a different section of the archive. "When one of us dies before finishing their work," continued, "someone else picks it up. We do not wait. We cannot wait. Our lives are too short for waiting. If an idea seems worth pursuing, we pursue it immediately. If it fails, we move on. If it succeeds, we build on it and then pursue the next idea." "That is restless," I said, "impatient." "Yes," agreed. "We are very restless, very impatient. It is our greatest flaw. We rush into things without fully understanding them. We make mistakes that more careful species would avoid." "But also your greatest gift." "Perhaps," smiled. "We will not know until the story is finished, and it will never be finished. That is another thing about being short-lived. We know that we will never see the ending, so we focus on making progress rather than reaching a destination." The index scores kept climbing. Human contributions passed 5,000 points, then 10,000, then 15,000. The council began receiving communications from older species. The who had held the top position for 2 million cycles wanted to know what was happening. How could a species that had barely discovered fire, in galactic terms, be approaching their score in mere decades? They were more curious than upset. They sent researchers to study human methods. Some of those researchers returned with strange ideas. Ideas about combining knowledge with concepts from human art and literature. The elders were disturbed. Then the humans proposed the synthesis initiative. Wei presented it to the High Council personally. She stood before the 7 assessors and explained her idea in simple terms. The Grand Archive contains 11 million cycles of knowledge, she said. The greatest collection of information in galactic history, but most of that knowledge has never been compared. The discoveries sit in their section. The discoveries sit in their section. They have never been systematically cross-referenced against each other. Cross-referenced how? Asked. We propose a permanent program to compare every piece of knowledge in the archive against every other piece. We will look for connections that nobody has noticed before. We will try combinations that nobody has tried before. We will ask questions that nobody has thought to ask. This will generate chaos, Assessor objected. Millions of researchers chasing random connections, resources wasted on failed experiments, dangerous combinations that could cause disasters like the folding. It will generate progress, replied calmly. Yes, some experiments will fail, many experiments will fail, but some will succeed, and those successes will open doors we did not even know existed. She looked around the chamber, meeting each assessor's eyes in turn. The index measures contribution to galactic progress. That is supposed to be the purpose of this institution. Not to guard knowledge, but to generate it. Not to protect what we have, but to discover what we might have. You speak as if we have been doing something wrong, said. Her crystalline form pulsed with faint irritation. Not wrong, said. Careful, very careful. You have been careful for 11 million cycles, and you have accomplished amazing things, but perhaps, she hesitated. This was the dangerous part, the part that might offend. Perhaps it is time to be a little less careful. Perhaps it is time to remember why you started gathering knowledge in the first place. The silence stretched, then slowly began to laugh. It was a strange sound from his species, like rocks grinding together, but it was clearly laughter. She is right, he said. She is right, and we all know it. We have been custodians when we should have been explorers. We have been protecting knowledge when we should have been using it. The vote on the synthesis initiative was not unanimous, but it passed. And everything changed. 20 cycles after first contact, the galaxy was a different place. The changes were visible everywhere. In the research stations where species that had never spoken now worked together. In the communication networks that carried ideas across impossible distances. In the ships that moved through dimensions that had not existed in known physics until a human researcher asked a foolish question. The Cosmic Technology Index had been restructured completely. It had to be. The old metrics could not capture what was happening. The simple point system assumed that innovation happened slowly, in separate streams, by individual species working alone. None of those assumptions were true anymore. Humanity's direct contributions had exceeded 50,000 points, an impossible number by the old standards, more than all the founding species combined, more than anyone had imagined any single species could achieve. But the direct contributions were not the most important change. The synthesis initiative had sparked something that spread far beyond human researchers. They had begun collaborating with for the first time in their histories. Their theoretical frameworks were incompatible, everyone had always said. But humans had shown that incompatible frameworks could be combined if you were willing to think creatively enough. The isolationists had opened their archives. For millions of cycles, they had kept their knowledge secret, sharing nothing with outsiders. A human diplomat had spent 3 years living among them, learning their language, eating their food, listening to their stories. When she finally asked about their knowledge, they agreed to share it. Nobody understood exactly what had convinced them. The diplomat said she had just asked nicely. Species that had considered themselves technologically mature were innovating again. The comfortable plateaus that had lasted for millions of cycles were crumbling. Researchers who had spent their entire careers studying a single narrow topic were now attending interdisciplinary conferences, learning about fields they had never considered relevant, asking questions they had never thought to ask. The galaxy's total innovation rate had increased by a factor of 40. High Coordinator stood before the assembled representatives of the Galactic Council. She had been promoted twice since the humans arrived. Her new title was High Coordinator of the Office of Collaborative Innovation, an office that had not existed before humans came, an office dedicated to exactly the kind of cross-disciplinary work that humans had introduced. "We have spent 11 million cycles accumulating knowledge," she said. Her voice carried across the vast chamber, translated simultaneously into 1,000 languages. "We built great archives. We celebrated our achievements. We measured our progress with careful points and precise calculations." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But we forgot something essential. Knowledge that sits unused is not knowledge at all. It is merely data, information without purpose, potential that is never realized." The chamber was full. Representatives from hundreds of species filled the viewing galleries. Many of them were species that had never attended a council session before, species that had considered themselves too small, too young, too insignificant to participate in galactic affairs. The humans had changed that perception. If a species barely out of its cradle could transform the galaxy, then anyone could contribute. A gestured toward the human delegation. Ambassador Wei sat in the front row. She was older now. Her hair had gone gray. Beside her sat younger humans, her successors. They were already planning the next generation of initiatives, already asking the next round of impossible questions. "Humanity reminded us why we began this work," continued. "Not to count points, not to rank ourselves against each other, not to guard our achievements jealously, but to understand, to grow, to reach for things we have not yet imagined." She looked out at the assembled representatives. Beings of crystal and light, beings of gas and energy, beings of flesh and blood, all of them watching, all of them listening. They showed us that knowledge is not a treasure to be hoarded. It is a fire to be shared. The more it spreads, the brighter it burns. The more minds that touch it, the more it grows. The chamber erupted in response. Every species had its own way of expressing approval. Some clapped, some sang, some flashed colors across their bodies, some released chemical signals. The combined effect was overwhelming, a wave of appreciation that crossed every cultural boundary. Later at the reception, High Assessor approached Ambassador Wei. The old assessor moved more slowly now. His 7 eyes did not blink as quickly as they once had, but his mind was still sharp. "Your species has changed everything," he said. "The Index will credit you with accelerating galactic progress by centuries. Perhaps historians will write about this moment for as long as history is recorded." Shook her head. The gesture was familiar now. Many species had adopted it. The knowledge was already there, all of it. Everything we discovered was sitting in your archive. Everything we combined was already available to anyone who wanted to look. Then why did no one else look? "I do not know," admitted. "Perhaps you were too close to it. Perhaps you had lived with it so long that you stopped seeing it. Or perhaps," she smiled, "perhaps you just needed someone to ask the wrong questions." Made the expression that had learned meant amusement. Wrong questions. Yes, that is a good way to describe it. You ask questions that should not need asking, questions that seem obvious or foolish, and somehow those questions lead to answers that none of us could find. "Everyone asks questions," said. "We just do not know which questions are forbidden." There are no forbidden questions. There are not supposed to be, but every culture develops assumptions, things everyone knows, ideas that nobody bothers to question because the answers seem obvious. Humans are too young to have those assumptions. We question everything because we do not know what is supposed to be unquestionable. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the reception. Around them, beings from across the galaxy mingled and talked, shared ideas, made plans, started collaborations that would have been unthinkable a few decades ago. "I have wondered something," said eventually. if you will permit a personal question. Of course, your lives are so brief. By the time you truly begin to understand the universe, you are gone. Does that not frustrate you? Does it not make everything seem pointless? Was quiet for a moment. It was a question humans ask themselves often. The shortness of life. The vastness of everything else. How could anything matter when you would be gone so quickly? Sometimes it frustrates us, she admitted. Sometimes we feel the weight of all the things we will never see, all the questions we will never answer, all the places we will never go. She looked up at the stars visible through the chamber's transparent ceiling. So many stars, so many possibilities. But we have learned to see it differently. We are not trying to reach a destination. We are trying to take steps. Each step is meaningful by itself, not because of where it leads. We may not see the future we are building, but we know it will be built. Our children will stand on our shoulders and see further than we ever could, and their children will stand on their shoulders. She turned back to, we are not running a race that we need to finish. We are planting seeds that we will never see grow into trees, and that is enough. Knowing that the seeds were planted, knowing that the trees will grow, that is enough. Above them, the Grand Archive hummed with activity. More data was flowing through its crystalline structures than ever before. New connections were being made every moment. New questions were being asked. New experiments were being proposed. The synthesis initiative had grown far beyond its original scope. It was no longer a human program. It was a galactic movement. Thousands of species were participating. Millions of researchers were working together. And somewhere, in a quiet corner of the archive, a young researcher from a species that had never made any significant contributions was looking at data that no one else had noticed. Data from two completely different fields. Data that did not seem to have any connection. She was about to ask a wrong question. She did not know that her question would lead to the next great breakthrough. She did not know that her name would be remembered for 1,000 cycles. She only knew that something about the data seemed interesting. Something about the patterns felt like they might connect. She asked her question anyway. That was the gift the humans had given the galaxy. Not technology, not knowledge, not even the synthesis initiative itself. They had given permission. Permission to be curious. Permission to be wrong. Permission to ask questions that seemed foolish. Permission to look in places where nothing useful was supposed to be found. Permission to be beginners, no matter how old you were. The galaxy was learning to think differently. Not because human thought was better, but because it was different. Because difference itself was valuable. Because every perspective, no matter how strange or limited, might see something that others had missed. And in that difference, in that persistent, restless refusal to accept that things had to stay the way they were, lay the spark that would carry civilization forward into ages yet unimagined. The story was not over. It would never be over. That was the point. The questions would keep coming. The combinations would keep being tried. The connections would keep being made. And somewhere always, there would be someone asking the wrong question that turned out to be exactly right.